So I'm at Antelope Island State Park and I'm going to look for some bison so I can paint it. I don't think I'm going to paint it like this one though. I'll show more of the island in a bit, but one of the photos I got was of this bison, and I projected it on this 9x12 piece of Yupo paper. Once I had the basic outline, I stopped using the projector and did a bit more detailed underdrawing. While I would have loved to have painted this bison live, and he was pretty docile, for safety reasons I just took some video for reference. The good thing about that is I can pick and choose the best shots from the video I took. I like this one, but obviously I chose to flip it, so he was facing right, because I liked it better that way, I guess. I was intending to eventually use Inktense pencils on this paper, but I've done that plenty of times in this channel. So instead I'm going to use these Neocolor pastel crayons and see how those might work differently. But what I'm drawing with here are actually pastel pencils. The pastel pencils only worked okay on Yupo paper. This super slippery plastic paper isn't really the best use for them. And the only ones that really worked at all were the General's chalk pastel pencils. I liked them because I could smooth out the lines with the paper stump. And I was just hoping it would provide an interesting colorful base and a good guideline to what I'll be doing today. These pastel pencils, like graphite, don't spread around after putting water on it, but you'll see in a bit that the Neocolor 2 water-soluble pastels will definitely spread out on this paper. And now that I have an underdrawing that should stay put, it's time to add the Neocolor. I'm tentative at first because I'm not sure how well the pigment will spread, so I'm starting fairly light. I knew that I wanted to have some blue sky and the mountains in the distance because that is what I observed while I was out taking pictures. The Great Salt Lake and the nearby Wasatch and Ochre Mountains are beautiful, aren't they? To test how well these blend, I'm going to spray things down with a water mister. It may seem odd, but I'm primarily blending the pigment with a metal palette knife. This is because a brush tends to soak up the water and pull the pigment off the paper. But this palette knife isn't absorbent at all, so it'll just spread the water and the pigment around. I can see I don't have enough pigment down, so I'm adding some more while the paper is still wet. That's better. This is a really abstract process, and this painting will not be overly detailed but fairly impressionistic, but I'll like the results, and I think you will too. It was a little hard to get the sky to look smooth, so I changed to a cheap nylon brush that isn't very absorbent either. This allowed me to get some smoother results. This paper is very non-absorbent, and the water just kind of sits on top until it dries. You can see that it is still quite wet because the lights from above are reflecting off the water. As it dries, the shine will go away, but I'll try to position the board to reduce the glare as I remember. If you've watched any of my other videos at all, you'll know that I like to try drawing on lots of different surfaces, with lots of different drawing mediums. A friend of mine called what I do mixed media drawing, and I really like the sound of that, because it's pretty much exactly what I do. Now it's time for more crayons on the bison. I'll take what I learned from the background blues and I'll apply a lot more pigment before getting it wet. I'm mostly following the colors I used in the underdrawing that I did with the pastel pencils. I was glad I did that because it serves as a pretty good guide. I'm trying not to just use brown though. I want some variety with the color. And since I know this is going to change a lot once I add water, I just want to make sure I have a decent contrast between my darks and light values. And I want to have both complementary colors and some analogous colors next to them, mostly blues, tans, orange, and purples. I'll fill in a lot of gaps with pink and brown too. I'm looking at my photo reference a lot while I do this to make sure I stay on track. Scribbling with crayons is kind of fun, but adding water can be even more fun. So now I'm spraying it with water and watching the magic happen. It's really a game of trust. I'm never sure how it will turn out. I guess with practice you start to understand how colors will likely mix, but I haven't used Neocolors on Yupo paper before, so I'm truly learning as I go here. And as you'll see, I will be adding a lot more layers after this. For now, I'm just seeing how these Neocolors will blend and react. It's a fun process, but can also be frustrating. Even though this looks very spontaneous, I actually spent several hours on this painting before I felt it was done. I'll just show the highlights here. I'll just keep spreading paint around and even remove some with a drier brush to keep the shape of the bison intact. I'm learning that the palette knife works best when there's a lot of water because I want the water to move the paint, not necessarily the knife moving the paint. What I'm going for is some spontaneous textures made by the water with help from me, but often the pigment continues to move around a bit while the water dries, so it was hard to know the result right away. But again, that's part of the fun. Layering pastel for the second layer works okay, and I'm doing that to try to get some darker results for the head and bottom side of the bison. And I worked on it for quite a while, and I was careful to remember to try not to just use brown. I tried to use a lot of reds and blues actually. I tried applying water directly from the knife rather than from a spray bottle to keep the water isolated. That works okay, but it did create a different type of texture. It was more globby than fluid. That could be good or bad depending on your preferences, I guess. The good and bad thing about this paper is nothing is permanent and it's easy to wipe away and try something different. Applying the Neocolor when the paper was wet didn't work as well as I thought. I think the only thing it would be good for is to add some color back in if you're trying to get a different color mixture. But generally it's good to let things dry first. You can see I had a lot of water pulled up here on the head area, so I'm going to step back and let it dry and, like this guy, maybe get something to eat. When everything was dry, I felt I still needed some darker darks for the underside. I wanted to keep things colorful, so I used some blues and magenta, but then it was back to getting it wet. I think I prefer the spray bottle method the most. The palette knife does keep things fairly abstract, and it really does move the water and pigment around. I'm basically color mixing directly on the paper. Once I have it pretty much blended the way I want, I'm going to switch to a brush because while I like the abstract textures, I want to have a bit more control towards the end. There is still plenty of water on the surface, so as it dries the pigment will leave interesting swirls and marks. I'm trying to make sure that I have the darks blend towards the light in a way that really shows the size and mass of this really cool animal. Here you can see the interesting lines that form as it dried, and I'm going to carefully blend some of them away, but not all of them. I'm also adding a lighter lavender color because it's a good complementary color to the yellow and oranges on the top, and it will help fill out the roundness of the body. I went back and forth like this for several more layers actually, so I'm going to speed things up since by now I think you get the gist of how I'm doing this. But even though I'm speeding it up for you, this process takes time and patience, but I think the results are worth it. Just look at these textures. I really like the effects I could get on this paper with these neo pastels. I'm blending away this top line with a really small craft brush with very little water, but otherwise I'm leaving the textures as is. Another technique to try is taking the pigment off the Neocolor pastel stick directly with a wet brush and then applying it to the dry paper. I didn't use very much water, just enough to grab some pigment. I did this with a couple of different bright colors. I found that it stayed on top fairly well, but eventually the bottom layers resolubilized and the pigment started to blend in a bit more. It probably looks like I ruined it, but again, this paper is so unique in its properties that it's pretty easy to experiment and keep what you like and get rid of what you don't. I did a lot of that in this painting. But I did find that last technique useful for darkening that eye. And then I dried off the brush completely so I could lift off the pigment to highlight the eye while it was still wet. So as I finish out the grasses for the field that this bison is in, let's recap a bit. Have fun getting reference photos. You can always paint at home. Once you have that photo, remember that tracing isn't cheating. There's so much more art to do after that outline is made. But use that detailed underdrawing as a guide to the abstract process that is coming. Yupo paper with Neocolor is a good combination, but it takes a lot of patience and practice. And don't be afraid to use lots of pigment and water. Blending often works best with a non-absorbent brush or, for the more adventurous, a palette knife. To keep from making a complete mess, let the things dry completely between each layer. A final tip that I forgot to share earlier is that you can also use an eraser to remove the pigment while it's dry. I did this for some nifty grass textures. Anyway, painting with Neocolor 2 pastel crayons on Yupo paper was a lot of fun. I was amazed by the textures I was able to get. It was fun to try to balance the completely abstract marks with carefully placed details and colors, to try to capture this bison in a way that I think was completely unique. These pastels work on other surfaces too. Check out this playlist for more tips and tricks on how to use Neocolor 2 pastel crayons in lots of different ways. Thanks for exploring art with me.